The People's Republic of China marks the 75th anniversary of its founding. We'll take a look back and look to the future. Hello, I'm Ahmed, and this is The Heat. The past 75 years has seen China rise from a poor country to the world's second largest economy. From a nation with limited paved roads to an infrastructure giant. Today, as China celebrates its 75th anniversary, the People's Republic is 11 years away from its goal of realizing socialist modernization and 25 years from becoming a great modern socialist country in all respects by the mid-21st century. As Dilma Rousseff, president of the New Development Bank and former president of Brazil, put it, economic transformation, technological innovation, and extraordinary social development have propelled China to become a beacon of hope and inspiration for the world. Well, there is much to talk about. Let's get straight to our panel. José Luis Bernal served as Mexico's ambassador to China for more than 4 years. He's currently with the Mexican Council on Foreign Affairs. Zoon is a research fellow with the Center for China and Globalization. And with us is David Monyae. He heads the University of Johannesburg Center for Africa-China Studies. And Victor Gao is a chair professor at Soochow University. Thanks, everyone, for being with us. Victor, let's start with you in Beijing. The Secretary General of the British East Asia Council, Alistair Mitchie, recently told the Global Times, and I'm quoting directly here, he said, "The core strength of China is that as a nation, it is built on the foundation of being the longest continuous civilization in the world. Within the DNA of this civilization is a consistent pattern of learning from the past. This governance model creates exceptional stability and fosters confidence among the Chinese people," unquote. So, Victor, looking at that statement as the backdrop, how do you see China's evolution over the past 75 years?
Thank you very much for having me. First of all, let's congratulate the 75th anniversary of the founding of the People's Republic of China. Yes, what you just now quoted is absolutely right. For China as a country, the Chinese people as a nation, and each Chinese person, including me, for example, in today's China, we have 3 different ways of looking at ourselves. One is the past, and China has uninterrupted, continuous civilization for more than 5,000 years, producing one of the most unique and extraordinary civilizations in the world. And the second dimension is today. And it is not only today in China, but also today in China with the rest of the world. And the third dimension is equally important, if not more important, that is the future. We want to project from today and based on the past into the future for the coming, let's say, 50 years, 100 years, or in the Chinese way of thinking, we think about 500 years or even 1,000 years. Basically, we are a very long-term thinker when we talk about the past, the present, and the future. That gives us a very much of a balance and a bearing in thinking about whatever we do today, because we have passed more than 5,000 years in a continuous civilization. We have tons of challenges to deal with today, and we need to position whatever we do in relation to what will happen in the future.
Ambassador Bernal, great to have you with us. Welcome to the show. If we go back to 1949 and we look at the numbers there, China at that time accounted for just a tiny fraction of the global economy. And today it accounts for 17% of global GDP. And in fact, if you use the PPP metric to look at that contribution, that's purchasing power parity, it's actually 19%. And of course, as we heard Victor tell us as well, China's growth, its rise has had an impact on the rest of the world as well. And if we look at Latin America, what impact has China's remarkable growth had on the countries of Latin America?
Trade between China and Latin America went from only $10 billion in the year 2000 to more than $450 billion in 22. China has become the second largest source of imports and the third largest export destination for Latin American countries. It's number one partner for countries like Brazil, Chile, Peru, and Argentina. Second most important partner for Mexico, Venezuela, Cuba, and Uruguay. Investment is also increasing in Latin America with the companies from China, not only state companies, but many private companies taking part in the most dynamic sectors in the development of the Latin American countries. Of course, there is also the financial component of this relationship, and very important to mention the increase in political relations, the visits, the bilateral visits on the two sides, and the white papers that China has dedicated to Latin America, two of them in the last 20 years, and many other mechanisms for cooperation, diplomatic relations, associations, in the terms of strategic or comprehensive associations between bilaterally and also by regionally. So there are many areas in which Latin America is also taking part of or taking benefits of this rapid development of China, and we're very happy to celebrate together this anniversary of the founding of the People's Republic.
Zoon, as we look at how China has grown, it's also been expanding its cooperation with countries worldwide, especially developing countries. We look at some of the numbers here. The scale of goods traded has surged from 1.1 billion in 1950 to $6 trillion this year. Recently, we talked with the deputy executive director of UN Women and to Mali's foreign minister as well. And we got their comments on the impact that China has had over the years. Let's listen to them.
Of course, the starting point for us always in UN Women starts with celebrating China's leadership in hosting the 4th World Conference on Women in 1995. And I happened to be there and to be present. So for us, we appreciate that and to continue to appreciate China's leadership in sustaining the commitments of the Beijing decisions that were taken to advance the empowerment and the rights of women. As UN Women, we also acknowledge China's achievements in poverty alleviation.
More than 100 million Chinese out of poverty. I think the economic growth in China is quite impressive. The wealth that is being developed in China, China is not turning its back to the other global south. China is willing to make sure that we all grow together. So we want to thank China to remain a partner, a solid partner, and understanding that we should all work in full solidarity.
So Zoon, looking at China's growth, what has that rise meant to the developing world and to what is a rapidly changing world order?
Thank you, Alan, firstly, for having me. I think I also, echo with both Mr. Victor Gao and the ambassador's comments as well about the impact that China's rise and transformation has made. And in particular, I appreciate this question as well, because the Global South, till a few decades ago, even though at that time too, since the reform and opening up, China was developing very fast. But the hope and expectation that China can have a role to play in encouraging a global order that is inclusive, that recognizes the growing needs and the growing need of representation for the Global South, that also recognizes that development is not going to be something that can happen by importing a very Eurocentric idea of how some parts of the world, the first world, we used to literally say a few, not that long ago, the first world developed, and that we need to copy paste those models. But that China has demonstrated its own unique approach, its own ways to prioritize understanding its domestic circumstances, its method of being critical and receptive of the changes that are happening globally and also domestically. So I think the first thing, number one, that China's development has made in terms of its impact on the Global South has been the way the Global South can see itself emerging and can see itself moving forward in ways that are truly creative and in ways that are inclusive of different vantage points and perspectives. Secondly, I'll also say that I think most people today who are observing the changes in, as you mentioned, the global order, notice that now there is a growing need for greater representation. There is a greater need to recognize that those few countries that post-World War II represented a certain percentage in terms of significance don't exactly do that anymore. And we have Asia, Latin America, Africa, and so many other parts of the world that are moving forward. Through the Belt and Road Initiative, of course, we have basic infrastructure investment. As the ambassador also mentioned, very sophisticated mechanisms to do technology transfer and make development possible. But at the same time, China is enabling mechanisms within the UN system, systems guidance as well, focusing on SDGs, having fora, creating fora and platforms for developing countries and the Global South to move forward. So there's a lot to say on this. It's really, I mean, I truly think that we're living in a very impactful time, in a time where it's possible for parts of the world that were truly isolated and left behind for centuries to have conversations, to develop, to think in more critical and creative ways how they want to be represented. And lastly, I'll just quickly say that I think today developing countries, because of China's not only capability and interest, but also real, impact in making opportunities possible for developing countries. It's possible for developing countries to choose paths that are better for them. And we're increasingly seeing that positive trend. So there's a lot more to look forward to in the near future, I hope.
Right, David Monyae, great to see you again, David. Let's talk about Africa. China has been the continent's largest trading partner for 15 consecutive years. Last year, that amounted to a record $282 billion. And as of 2 years ago, which is the figures that we looked at, more than 3,300 Chinese enterprises were invested in 52 African countries. And there's a similar number of African countries which have signed on to China's Belt and Road Initiative. How would you characterize China's impact on the countries of Africa?
I think this is a relationship that is all-weather relationship. It goes back since the formation of today's China, 1949, only 6 years into China's revolution, 1955, at Bandung Conference, China participated, and it was at that moment that Africa, Asia agreed for the need of transformation, not just of relation between Africa and Asia, but at a global level. The inequalities, the question of racism at the global level, the lack of technology transfer, cultural exchange, people to people. So all what is happening now, it goes back. If one goes to the Bandung communique, you see it's a continuity. And up to the death of Chairman Mao in 1976 and the opening up, we've seen a consistent close collaboration between Chinese and African people in fight against colonialism and imperialism. And this moved into real trade and more pragmatic since the opening up to the formation of the Forum on China-Africa Cooperation. And today, I think you see the shift that the relationship is not just politicians and business people. It's now getting much more deeper into cultural, people-to-people, sport, and also technically getting on issues such as space discussions and a lot of opportunities, I think, in terms of going ahead, far beyond China-Africa, talk in terms of the Global South that my colleague has already alluded to.
So, Victor, let's look at some of the specifics on how China has changed over the past 75 years. Let's look at the hard numbers. Well, CGTN's Zhao Yang has a closer look at those numbers. Let's watch.
When it comes to people's well-being, one indicator is life expectancy. And China used to have one of the lowest in the world, but the changes over 75 years have been drastic. With living standards and healthcare improving, the average life expectancy in China has increased from 35 years in 1949, that was when New China was founded, to 78 in 2023, now amongst the highest in the world. The country is also seeing the lowest mortality rates, with figures falling to 15 for every 100,000 pregnant women and 4.5 per 1,000 live births. Now, in 1949, China's per capita disposable income was just a meager 49 yuan. That's about $7 US. Today, this figure tops more than 39,000 yuan, or some $5,500 US. And through the years, China has been working hard to create jobs for its labor force whilst developing its economy. The country's 2023 employment figure stands at 740 million. That's approximately the combined population of Europe. In the past decades, China has also built the world's largest social security system and healthcare system. More than 95%, that's about 1.3 billion people in China, are covered by the National Basic Medical Insurance Program. The number of medical institutions expanded from less than 4,000 to now well over 1 million. From just one bed for 1,000 people in 1965 to now more than 7 beds per 1,000. In the year 2000, China established a catalogue of over 1,500 medicines covered by insurance, and as of 2023, that list has doubled, reducing the cost burden on patients. When it comes to living conditions, China's per capita housing construction area for urban residents quadrupled from over 8 square meters in 1949 to more than 40 square meters in 2023. And China has also laid out a plan to continue improving people's well-being. And these measures include raising the share of personal income, promoting full employment, boosting the availability of quality medical resources, and developing elderly care programs and industries.
That was CGTN's Zhao Yang reporting there. So, Victor, you know, as we can see, from jobs to housing to healthcare, China has changed radically over the past 75 years. Talk to us about this evolution on the quality of life in China.
Absolutely, I agree with all the numbers quoted. She talked about the life expectancy, which is absolutely true. And also in terms of the average height of the Chinese people, it has been increasing significantly. Now, in terms of urbanization and a whole range of all the other things, I think China has made a tremendous amount of transformation. But allow me to mention several real examples. I remember when I was in investment banking in the 1990s, the rule of thumb I always remember was that the size of the US economy at that time was about 8 times larger than China. And Japan's economy, in terms of the size, was about 4 times as big as China. Now, China's economy is more than 3 times that of Japan, and China's economy is already larger than the US economy if we use purchasing power parity. And I think in terms of official exchange rate, within the coming 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 years, the size of the Chinese economy will be larger than that of the United States. And if you believe in Elon Musk, he kept saying that by the middle of this century, the size of the Chinese economy measured in official exchange rate will be about doubling the size of that of the United States. Back in 1978, when China started the economic and political reform and opening to the outside world, China and India were more or less on the par with each other in terms of the size of the economy. But now, China is more than 5 times as big as India's economy. Now, when we put these things in perspective relative to other countries, you can see that the change in China is real, the transformation is profound, and the impact on not only the Chinese people and the society in China, but also the rest of the world is huge.
Right.
And China is not yet reaching its final destination yet.
Ambassador Bernal, over the past 20 years, China and Mexico have really grown their economic relations. Last year, I mean, you've mentioned some of these numbers, China-Mexico trade volume reached over $121 billion. And I'm wondering, you know, as we see increasing global uncertainty right now, I mean, how do you see the significance of China's impact on its relationship with Mexico, as well as the broader region?
When we speak about the increasing presence of China in the world, it's important to remember that when the Belt and Road Initiative started 11 years ago, The original conception of the initiative did not include Latin America and the Caribbean. Nonetheless, when we look at the reality of this expanding relationship, by the end of last year, 20 countries of Latin America had already signed some sort of cooperation agreement with China. At the same time, in the last 5 years, 5 Latin American countries re-established relations with China, relations that before they had island of Taiwan. Also, on this bi-regional cooperation, the China CELAC Forum, the China and the Conference of Latin American and Caribbean States, has become the most important instrument for region-to-region communication and cooperation. And there is a great future for this bilateral relationship, region-to-region, given the Latin American and Caribbean countries' resource endowment and strategic location, the complementarity of the respective economic structures, and the need to grab new opportunities for Latin America, which are all the countries are experiencing deep domestic transformation. In the case of Mexico, we have developed a very important and very close relationship for the last 20, 25 years. As you mentioned, bilateral trade last year totaled almost $130 billion, which is important to keep in mind this figure because there are not so many countries with this level of trade with China in the world. Of course, in this bilateral trade, Mexico has been importing the bigger size of trade. We are having a relationship 9-to-1 or less, and we consider that this bilateral trade, even if there are some voices calling for some sort of restrictions to imports in Mexico, we are insisting that 70% of imports coming from China into Mexico are industrial inputs that are transforming the Mexican economy.
Right.
And this has, of course, a multiplier effect on local development, the absorption of technology, employment, and exports. Chinese investment has also been increasing in the last 5 years.
Yeah.
We count more than 500 new Chinese companies that have been established in Mexico.
Zoon, you know, we were talking a moment ago about how quickly the world is changing and China's role in it. Jeffrey Sachs, the world-renowned economics professor at Columbia University, he said he believes that there are two competing visions in the world today. The first vision entails one country or region leading the rest of the world. That's a belief held by the elites in the West, and it's been held that way for centuries, since the 1800s, since 1800. The second vision is one in which all parts of the world share in true common prosperity. That is something that China champions. How important is this distinction as we look at China's role in the world?
I think one of the transformations that we have seen, also referring to the previous question you asked me about the Global South, is this recognition that we don't need someone to dictate, or we don't need moralism. I mean, there's a big difference. Developing countries today, as was also mentioned by our colleague, the recognition that we didn't become independent countries, fight for our freedoms from the colonizers, to be now dictated in this garb of imperialism, or to misrecognize that actually individual countries and regions, whether we talk about Latin America, Asia, they have their own aspirations, and the biggest aspiration, the most important common denominator between countries is development, which means human-centric development. Yeah. And I completely agree that, even when we talk about even IR theories or this discipline which has emerged in the last 200 years of observing mainly what happened in a certain part of the world, is imposing the notion that imperialism is the only way forward, that for any most powerful country in a moment of the world, the only logical direction is to ensure that others follow and they lead, and that this, whatever their experience has been, should be forcefully or otherwise imposed on other countries. So I think what China represents is a basic emotion, is a cry for being treated as equals, and for this recognition that our ideas, our histories, our heroes, our perspectives are true as well. And this is where a more inclusive, a more an approach that that says that we don't need to be uniform, but united in certain goals is being championed by China. So I'll say that when we talk about the 5 principles of peaceful coexistence, respecting domestic wisdom, domestic processes, domestic paths determined by people is something that China is championing. Recognizing that no one system, even for China, and I'll add quickly, that China's own success in the last 75 years is also the result of recognizing room for improvement. This is completely contrary to a system that says we are perfect and you ought to follow precisely what we are doing. So China demonstrates an inclusive path forward.
Yeah, that's right. It's a very dynamic system. David, there was a recent address at the European Parliament. It was made by Jan Zahradil. He's a former member of the European Parliament. He said recently that the West still doesn't fully understand China and its potential. He went on to say, and I'm quoting him directly here, he said, many of us are still caught up in a post-Cold War mentality. We still see the world like a unipolar world of the 90s, although today's world is definitely multipolar. And it will be even more in the future, with China as one of its most important poles, unquote. What are your thoughts on that?
An excellent observation of reality at the moment. I think if you look at the China's story, as far as concerned Africa, I think we have seen that China is forward-looking, inclusive, openness, and continuously fighting for multilateralism as well as involvement of the global South, and to have a shared kind of future involving development and issues of development and security seen as 2 sides of the same coin, and recognition that civilization are different, but they're all equal. I think this is quite important. And that thinking lacks in the Western world. The Western world look at the world through the lenses of their own culture. And therefore, issues of modernization is equated to westernization. It's something that Africa rejects and China rejects. And therefore, there is a need, particularly with the ending of the UNGA General Assembly and the Summit of the Future, to really bring the world to start dealing with issues of reform and find ways of dealing with peace, sustainable way of developing the world without necessarily using violence as a means to bring peace and security in the world.
Okay, and that's where we have to leave it. Thank you to all of you for being with us. And that's it for this edition of The Heat. I'm Ahmed in Washington, D.C.